I knew something was wrong the second I saw the empty leash coil on my front porch. Shadow, my 95-pound Bernese Mountain Dog, never left my property unless he was tethered to that old navy blue leash. Normally, I'd spot his big fluffy form lazing on the shady side of the porch, head resting on his paws, eyes half-lidded. But that morning, he was nowhere to be found. I called his name as I searched around the hydrangea bushes by the fence, a routine we'd done 100 times. Usually, he'd pop up with a loud bark or a happy tail wag whenever I stepped into the yard. This time, the yard was eerily silent. A creeping sense of dread took hold. Shadow had been missing before, once when he'd chased a squirrel 2 blocks away, but I'd found him within the hour. I checked the clock, 8:27 a.m. My neighbor across the street, Wendy, was backing her car out of the driveway. I jogged over, waving my arms. She paused, rolled down her window, and gave me a confused look. "Did you see Shadow anywhere this morning?" I asked, keeping my voice steady though my heart was pounding. Wendy shook her head. "No, I haven't," she said. "Is he missing?" I nodded, glancing back at my porch. "Leash is here, but he's gone." Wendy offered to help me look for him. We spent an hour walking up and down the neighborhood, calling his name. The more we looked, the more uneasy I became. Shadow was big and extremely friendly. If he'd wandered off, someone would have noticed him. Folks out here love to dote on animals, especially large, gentle dogs like Bernese Mountain Dogs. But no one had seen him. By the time I circled back to the house, my mind was racing. I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something more sinister was going on. With shaky hands, I dialed the local sheriff's department. Officer Ruby Vaughn picked up. I explained the situation, my words tumbling out. She told me they'd keep an eye out, but reminded me that dogs often slip out of fenced yards. "He might just show up by dinner," she said in a reassuring tone before ending the call. But dinner came and went. No Shadow. The next day, I trudged through my usual routine with a knot of worry in my gut. My wife, Lorraine, used to say, "Shadow's got a built-in compass. If he's out, he'll wander home by night." She passed away 4 years ago, and I sometimes felt like Shadow was all I had left of her. The dog was the last gift she gave me before the cancer got too bad. That memory alone fueled my search with desperation. On the second night, I pinned up flyers around the community. Our quaint little subdivision in Willow Creek prided itself on neatness, symmetrical lawns, mailboxes spaced at precise intervals, and not a stray weed in sight. The Willow Creek Homeowners Association was notoriously strict about aesthetics, especially the chair of the HOA, Karen Whitlock. She'd once threatened to fine a neighbor for painting their front door a shade too bright for her liking. Karen's name flitted through my mind, though I pushed it aside. She had once complained that Shadow was too large to be out walking in the neighborhood without a muzzle, as if my dog was some vicious beast. She had no official power over my property, but her voice carried weight in neighborhood affairs, and she relished enforcing every petty rule she could. Still, the idea that she'd be involved in Shadow's disappearance seemed absurd, at least at the time. I left no stone unturned. I called local vets, the county shelter, and even posted in online lost pet groups. Days passed with no result. Each evening I'd return home, hoping to find Shadow napping on the porch, maybe with a new burr or leaf stuck in his fur from one of his escapades. But each evening, the porch remained heartbreakingly empty. On the morning of the third day, just as I was about to drive down to the shelter again, I heard a knock on my front door. Standing there was a uniformed deputy, Sheriff Lyle Goodman, a kind-eyed man who'd seen the best and worst of this town for more than 2 decades. His expression was tense. I noticed a folded piece of paper tucked under his arm. "Mr. Grant," he said, clearing his throat, "I'm here about Shadow." My heart jolted. I steeled myself for bad news. "Did you find him?" I asked, voice trembling. He glanced over his shoulder before meeting my eyes again. "In a manner of speaking, yes. But it's complicated." As relief and confusion wrestled inside me, Lyle let out a heavy sigh. "We have reason to believe your dog is being held at Karen Whitlock's residence." For a moment, I couldn't process his words. The pit in my stomach hardened. Karen had my dog, and he was too large for her taste. Why on earth would she hold on to him? Instantly, a swirl of emotions took over. relief that Shadow might be alive, but panic that he was with the one person in this neighborhood who had no fondness for him. Without waiting for further explanation, I grabbed my keys, ready to confront her. I'll put a hand on my shoulder. Easy now, Mr. Grant. This is a delicate situation. She's claiming the dog is a danger to the HOA regulations. She's refusing to give him up. And he hesitated. We're investigating possible theft charges. That's grand theft, if we prove she took him intentionally without your consent. His words sank in, feeling both surreal and enraging. My dog was stolen by the same woman who had filed more HOA complaints than the rest of the neighborhood combined. I looked at the deputy. Are you telling me she just snatched my dog because he was big? He nodded gravely. We'll handle it properly, Mr. Grant, but we'll need a statement. My fist clenched and unclenched. There was no way I was going to let this rest. You've got it, I said firmly. Let's get my Shadow back. The rest of that day moved at a furious pace. It felt like waking up in the middle of someone else's nightmare, only to realize it was my own life. I found myself seated in the lobby of the Willow Creek Sheriff Station, going through the formalities of reporting a dog theft. A dog theft. If anyone had told me last week this could happen in our little suburban paradise, I would have thought they were reading too many sensational headlines. My heart was pounding as I scrawled my signature on the statement. Beside me, Lyle quietly filled out some paperwork, occasionally asking me questions. Have you seen any disputes with Karen Whitlock recently? Did she or the HOA send you any letters about Shadow? What reasons might she give for taking him? I answered as honestly as I could. She used to slip notes in my mailbox, I admitted. Complaints about his size, about me letting him lie on the front porch without a muzzle. She'd say he might frighten children walking by. I remembered how ridiculous it sounded because Shadow was the gentlest dog I'd ever owned. He loved kids, especially if they came bearing treats or ear scratches. The deputy nodded. That aligns with what we've learned so far. Apparently, Karen told them Shadow was unregistered and above the weight limit for community dogs per some obscure bylaw. But those rules were usually about pit bulls or Rottweilers, strictly out of some misguided fear. Bernese Mountain Dogs rarely fell under breed restrictions, and in any case, no dog in Willow Creek had an official weight limit. Karen had tried to argue for one at last year's HOA meeting, but it never passed. I finished signing the documents and stood up, my knees weak. So, can I go get him now? Lyle frowned. We're working on a search warrant, but it's not so simple. Karen's got a lawyer friend who's asked for time to resolve the matter internally with the HOA before it escalates. They're claiming it's not theft if she's holding the dog to protect the neighborhood. I felt heat rise to my face. That's absurd. She can't just hold my dog hostage. Lyle's mustache twitched. We agree, but we have to follow procedure. Hang tight, Mr. Grant. Reluctantly, I left the station. I felt helpless as I drove back into Willow Creek. The neat houses with their identical lawns and winding sidewalks never looked so oppressive. They seemed like mannequins in a storefront, perfect on the surface, hollow underneath. When I got home, I noticed a woman peeking from behind her curtain across the street. Eileen. She opened her door as soon as I stepped out of my car. Eileen was in her early 70s, a retired teacher who spent her days crocheting and secretly feeding peanuts to the neighborhood squirrels. She walked over, clutching a big pink cardigan around her shoulders. I heard the rumors, she whispered. Is Karen keeping Shadow at her house? I sighed. That's the sheriff's belief, yes. Eileen shook her head. That woman is trouble. She's always poking around with a measuring tape, checking if people's fences are half an inch too high. I've had more than a few run-ins with her myself. My next-door neighbor, Brad, must have overheard because he ambled over, wearing his lawn-mowing shoes, grass stains on his shorts. Grant, you need any help? He asked. I got a truck. We could take a drive, talk to her ourselves. Eileen elbowed him. Don't do anything rash, Brad. This is a legal matter now. She turned to me with a reassuring nod. We'll keep our eyes open. The moment we see Shadow, we'll call you. A few other neighbors trickled over, each offering suggestions or moral support. This wave of concern reminded me that not everyone in Willow Creek was like Karen. Some of them just wanted a quiet life, free from her endless complaint spree. By mid-afternoon, I was exhausted, but adrenaline kept me upright. At around 4 p.m., I received a phone call. A polished-sounding woman introduced herself as Penelope Martin, the Willow Creek HOA's secretary. She apologized for the confusion and said the HOA would be holding an emergency meeting in 2 days to discuss the presence of overweight canines in the neighborhood. She invited me to attend. I nearly dropped the phone. Overweight canines? I repeated, incredulous. What does that have to do with Karen stealing my dog? Penelope gave a little cough. We're reviewing the possibility that Ms. Whitlock was acting in the community's best interest. The matter is quite serious, you see, but we do want to address any misunderstanding and come to a fair resolution for everyone involved. Fair resolution? I echoed. There is nothing fair about kidnapping a person's pet. She paused, as if searching for the right corporate spin. We understand your frustration, Mr. Grant. But Ms. Whitlock is a longtime member of the HOA board, and we want to ensure that everything is resolved amicably. I was about to fire back with a string of words that were decidedly not amicable, but I forced myself to remain civil. I'll see you at the meeting, I said, then hung up. With the line dead, I replayed her words in my head. Ms. Whitlock was acting in the community's best interest. The nerve. I stared at Shadow's empty dog bowl in the kitchen, feeling a mixture of anger and sorrow welling up. How would I get through 2 more days with my dog locked away in Karen Whitlock's house? Desperate for more information, I decided to call Wendy, who'd helped search for Shadow earlier. She picked up on the first ring. I explained the new twist. They're calling him an overweight canine, I said bitterly, like he's some massive menace. Wendy let out a disbelieving snort. Karen's got half the board in her back pocket. She's probably pressuring them with some new bylaw nonsense. If you need someone at that night before the emergency, the more neighbors that show up, I slept no more than a few. I thanked her. My voice morning came gratitude. Dull and hanging overcast. I slumped onto the couch. By 6 a.m., I was pacing the living room. With each minute since Lorraine's I felt more certain that no matter what happened in a simple, I had to get Shadow back. Now, the meeting was scheduled for noon at the Willow Creek Community Center, power-hungry, an old building with a sterile smell. I closed my eyes, recalling the weight of Shadow's I arrived half an hour early, resting on my leg. A small group of neighbors, deep brown eyes, watching me patiently, seemed to attract hushed whispers from the board members Lorraine's last gift near the podium. And I promised her Karen Whitlock wasn't among them yet. The idea that he was locked somewhere, intimidation, maybe confused and scared. At exactly 12:05, 2 days. Karen That's how long I had to wait until the emergency meeting. Stiff posture. Until then, a crisp blazer all I could do was hope the law and a stack of files clutched to her chest. But a small voice paused to give me a pointed stare. Lips Karen's flair for dramatics smirk. And the HOA. It was the kind of look that said, "Things could get worse before they got better, but we'll see." My neighbor Winnie caught my eye and gave me an encouraging nod. Brad was there too, arms folded across his chest. Eileen and a few others I recognized from the flyer distribution sat in the back, looking steely-eyed. Seeing them bolstered me. Penelope Martin, the HOA secretary, stepped up to the microphone. Thank you, everyone, for attending this emergency session of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. We are here to discuss matter number 24B, potential weight restrictions on canines in the neighborhood, as well as a dispute regarding Ms. Karen Whitlock and Mr. Henry Grant. She coughed discreetly, avoiding my gaze. We'll begin with Ms. Whitlock presenting her concerns. Karen marched up to the lectern. Her posture was so rigid that her shoulders looked like they'd been molded from concrete. She cleared her throat loudly, scanning the audience. Members of the HOA board, I've long raised concerns about large dogs roaming our neighborhood. While I have nothing against animals, I do have a vested interest in the safety and comfort of our residents. 3 days ago, I found Mr. Grant's Bernese Mountain Dog, an enormous creature, potentially over 100 pounds, wandering the street. No leash, no owner in sight. I felt my jaw clench. Liar. Shadow had never just wandered off. He was stolen. Karen went on. When I attempted to return the dog to Mr. Grant's address, I found him absent. Considering the dog's size and the immediate risk to children playing on sidewalks, I made the judgment call to keep him secure in my residence until I could contact the authorities or the HOA to handle the situation properly. Winnie raised her hand from the audience. Why not just call the sheriff the moment you found him? She challenged. Why hold him for days? Karen's lips twitched into a thin line. I made several attempts to contact animal control. They weren't available immediately, and I wanted to ensure no one was harmed by the dog. Her gaze flicked to me with a calculated sneer. I've been collecting evidence of Mr. Grant's disregard for our policies. As you'll see in these documents, she waved a manila folder in the air. He has repeatedly failed to keep his dog on a leash. I've witnessed it sunbathing on his porch with no muzzle. A small, outraged laugh escaped my throat. Sunbathing on my porch is not the same thing as roaming unleashed. The dog was on my property. Karen ignored me and pressed on. Our bylaws clearly state that no pet should be allowed to frighten, disturb, or endanger neighbors. And a dog of that weight, left unsupervised, could easily. Enough. I interrupted, frustration boiling over. Show us a single complaint of Shadow hurting anyone or anything. He's a gentle dog. Everyone who's met him knows that. A chorus of agreement rose from the audience. Brad called out, "My kids love Shadow. He's friendlier than half the cats in this neighborhood." Karen's expression tightened. For a moment, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. But she pressed on. Be that as it may, I was following my responsibility as an HOA member. Penelope cleared her throat. All right, Ms. Whitlock, thank you. Mr. Grant, would you like to respond formally? I stood, hands shaking from anger and a tinge of nerves. Public speaking wasn't my favorite activity, but I had no choice. Yes, I would. Shadow is a well-trained Bernese Mountain Dog. He's registered with my vet, has all his vaccinations, and is recognized as docile by everyone here except Ms. Whitlock. There's no policy against owning a large breed dog. She knows that because the HOA board voted down her proposed size restriction last year. I shot Karen a hard look. What Ms. Whitlock did wasn't just suspicious, it was illegal. She trespassed onto my property, took my dog, and kept him locked away. That's theft, plain and simple. A low murmur rippled through the room. Karen fidgeted with her file folder, her jaw set. Those are allegations, she said stiffly. I pressed on. We have proof. The sheriff's department found evidence that leads them to believe Shadow was taken. Not found wandering, not rescued, taken. And now there's an active investigation. Because if this dog was truly so dangerous, Ms. Whitlock would have called the authorities immediately. Instead, she's been hiding him in her garage. She cut me off with a scoff. And what if I have photographs of him running loose, scaring children? You don't think that's a safety concern? I shook my head incredulously. Produce them. Show the board. Show all of us. But we all know you'll find no pictures of a dangerous dog. This is just your vendetta. The tension in the room was thick. Penelope tried to keep order. Everyone, please. One at a time. Karen's face hardened, and she let out a harsh sigh, flipping open her folder. She displayed a few grainy snapshots on the overhead screen. Shadow, sniffing around my front garden or lying near the sidewalk. In each one, he was either on a leash or in my yard, nowhere near any children. She advanced the slides quickly, as if to prevent folks from scrutinizing them too closely. I took a steadying breath. There's nothing they're showing him at large or threatening anyone. An elderly man in the front row, Mr. Clark, piped up. She complains about every dog in this neighborhood. Are we going to start seizing them all? This is nonsense. A wave of nods and muttered agreement spread through the audience. Karen turned to the board, flustered. This meeting is about the weight restriction, which the HOA has the right to impose. If the dog is truly near 100 pounds, that's bigger than some grown adults. It's a liability. Before Penelope could regain control, a short woman with salt and pepper hair, Emily Rodriguez, another board member, leaned forward. The primary concern at hand seems to be less about an unapproved dog and more about Ms. Whitlock's potential wrongdoing. Whether or not the HOA ever passes a weight restriction, it doesn't excuse forcibly removing a neighbor's pet from private property. A quiet applause broke out. Karen's cheeks reddened, but she forced a tight smile. I simply did what any responsible resident would do. A voice from the back chimed in. Responsible residents don't hide a neighbor's dog for days on end. That comment lit a fire under several audience members. The outcry grew, prompting Penelope to bang a small gavel. "Order, please," she called, her voice wavering. "We'll take a recess to review this new information." The board members filed off to a side room. Karen shot me a glare and hurried after them. In the aftermath, neighbors swarmed around me with supportive murmurs. I thanked them, the tension still coiled in my muscles. Outside, the day had turned sweltering, an early summer heat descending on Willow Creek. We waited for a good 20 minutes while muffled arguing leaked through the closed door. When the board finally returned, Penelope's face was pale. Karen trailed behind, looking furious but trying to maintain a composed facade. Penelope cleared her throat into the microphone. After discussion, the board has decided that a formal decision on any potential canine weight restriction will be tabled until next month's regular HOA meeting. In the meantime, we expect Ms. Whitlock to return Mr. Grant's dog immediately. We do not have the authority to override local law enforcement in their ongoing investigation. Ms. Whitlock, we strongly encourage you to cooperate with the Sheriff's Department. This meeting is now adjourned. A collective sigh of relief escaped me and several neighbors. Some even cheered. Karen stiffened as if she'd been slapped, but she made no move to argue in front of everyone. For now, she was cornered, or so I thought. As soon as I turned to gather my belongings, Karen brushed past me with a tight-lipped smile. "You'll regret crossing me, Mr. Grant," she hissed under her breath, then swept out of the community center. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Despite the board's statement, I didn't yet have Shadow in my arms. All I had was a public condemnation of Karen's actions and her promise of trouble. But that was enough to steel my resolve. Because sometimes when a bully pushes too far, they awaken the fighting spirit in those they've stepped on. And I was no longer willing to keep quiet. The next day, I eagerly awaited a call confirming Shadow's safe return. Instead, I got radio silence. Karen's phone went straight to voicemail. No one answered her door. Her blinds were drawn, cars absent. It was like she'd vanished. So I marched down to the sheriff's station, determined to learn if they'd executed that search warrant. On my way in, I almost ran into Lyle Goodman, who was stepping out with a file in hand. He stopped when he saw me, eyebrows raised in sympathy. "Mr. Grant was just thinking of you," he said. "We tried to serve the warrant at Ms. Whitlock's residence this morning. She wasn't there." I felt my stomach drop. "Is she on the run with my dog?" He exhaled. "We can't be sure, but her neighbors say she left late last night with a large crate in her SUV. We've alerted Highway Patrol in case she tries to leave the county with the dog." My mind raced. Was she truly that desperate? So what happens now? Lyle patted the file in his hand. "Now we investigate. If we find enough evidence to show she intentionally stole him, we can press grand theft charges. But we need to locate her and Shadow." Grand theft. The words felt heavy yet strangely affirming. It meant the authorities weren't treating this as a petty neighbor dispute. They believed a real crime had occurred. I left the station trying to grasp the magnitude of Karen's disappearance. Late that afternoon, I got an unexpected message from a block number. It was a text containing only a single photo, a dimly lit shot of a dog kennel in what looked like a garage with Shadow curled up inside. My heart seized. The poor pup looked anxious, but physically okay. There was no message accompanying the photo, no explanation. My immediate thought was that Karen herself had sent it, taunting me. Or maybe someone close to her was trying to blow the whistle. Either way, I saved the photo and forwarded it to Lyle. Seconds later, my phone rang. Lyle's voice was sharp. "Where did you get this?" I told him about the block number. He paused. "You think it's Ms. Whitlock?" "I don't know. Why would she show me she still has him?" He let out a thoughtful grunt. "Could be intimidation, or it could be someone else entirely. We'll try to trace the number. Meantime, if you get anything else, let us know." I hung up, nerve endings buzzing. That night, I double-checked every door and window in my house. Part of me was scared. If Karen could steal my dog, what else was she capable of? As the days trudged on, the tension in Willow Creek grew palpable. A local reporter caught wind of the drama. She interviewed me in my driveway, camera crew in tow, shining a bright spotlight on Shadow's empty dog bowl and the HOA tyranny swirling around Karen. I was initially reluctant to appear on camera, but I hoped the attention might flush her out of hiding. If Karen saw that the whole town was turning against her, maybe she'd return Shadow before things escalated. The segment aired that evening on our small local channel, turning Karen into a mini villain in the eyes of the community. Strangers started leaving me messages of support. One offered to start a legal fund in case I had to go to court. Another claimed to have seen a black SUV with out-of-state plates traveling north with a big dog crate in the back. The tips were all over the place, but the sheriff's department followed up on each one. Karen's disappearance had become a local spectacle. Meanwhile, a few of the Willow Creek board members visited my home. Emily Rodriguez, the one who'd spoken up at the meeting, and Alan Porter, an older gentleman with a cane, sat down with me over coffee. They wanted to distance the HOA from Karen's actions, insisting the organization itself never sanctioned the dog's removal. "We've always known she was assertive," Emily said diplomatically, stirring her tea, "but we had no idea it would go this far." Alan added, "If she doesn't surface soon, we'll have to remove her from the board. Our bylaws allow it, though that's usually reserved for more mundane misconduct." He shook his head. "Never thought we'd see the day we had to do it for dog theft." I appreciated their candor, but the fact remained that Shadow was still missing, and I was losing sleep and hope with each passing day. I try not to imagine him cooped up in a cage, or worse. I kept telling myself Karen's brand of cruelty was petty and bureaucratic, not physically abusive. But my stomach turned at every unanswered question. That evening, when he swung by with a casserole, claiming, "You can't worry on an empty stomach," she was accompanied by Brad, who brought a toolbox. "In case you need anything fixed or reinforced," he said with a meaningful nod. It was neighborly solidarity at its finest, and I found myself unexpectedly emotional at their kindness. Over dinner, we speculated about Karen's motives. "She might be trying to get rid of Shadow," Wendy said quietly. Taking him to a shelter out of town," or she stopped, seeing my expression. Brad jumped in. "She won't do anything that drastic. She's all about making a point, right? Probably wants you to sweat." I try to believe that. Still, the anxiety gnawed at me. After they left, I was tidying the kitchen when I heard a knock on the back door. I froze. It was nearly 10 p.m. No one ever used the back door. My pulse hammered in my ears as I flipped on the porch light. Stepping out cautiously, I found a small envelope taped to the screen. No one was around. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Your dog is safe, but people are asking questions. Meet me at Redwood Storage, unit number 27, tomorrow at midnight if you want the truth. Come alone." It wasn't signed. My first instinct was to call Lyle, but I hesitated. Whoever wrote it might clam up if I brought the police. This might be my only chance to find Shadow. Anxiety warred with caution. I decided to at least alert the sheriff about the note. Maybe they could scope out Redwood Storage from a distance, provide backup if needed. That way, I wouldn't be walking into a trap alone. Lyle was initially concerned. "This could be dangerous," he said, "but we'll be discreet if we do come." My mind whirled the rest of the night, imagining all the ways this could go wrong. Perhaps Karen had an accomplice, or maybe it was someone in the HOA with a guilty conscience. If there was a shred of hope it would lead me to Shadow, I had to go. When the next evening rolled around, I parked half a block away from Redwood Storage, heart thudding like a jackhammer. The facility was a row of dimly lit units behind a chain-link fence. A single flickering lamp lit the far corner. Midnight approached slowly. The street was empty except for the hum of a distant highway. I approached unit number 27, noticing the padlock was unlatched. I gave a quiet whistle, unsure if anyone was inside. Slowly, I rolled the door open. My eyes strained in the darkness, scanning for movement. My foot kicked something, a discarded cardboard box. No sign of a person or a dog. The unit smelled musty, like stale air and dust. I stepped in further, the door rattling behind me. Suddenly, a flashlight beam hit me square in the face. "Don't move," said a strained voice. I froze, raising my hands instinctively. The flashlight wavered, revealing a wiry figure in a hoodie. From behind me, I heard the faint scuff of shoes on concrete. My chest seized. Two of them? I try not to panic. Then the hooded figure lowered the beam, revealing the face of a teenage boy, maybe 17 or 18. He looked just as startled as I was. He thrust a folder into my hands. "These are hers," he whispered, voice shaking. "Karen's. She's my aunt." My mouth went dry. "Your aunt? Where is she? And where's my dog?" He jerked his head. "Read the papers. Karen's in over her head. She's desperate. She told me to deliver them to you, but I didn't want to do it her way. I just thought." He trailed off, eyes darting around. "Look, I gotta go." Before I could respond, he slipped past me and sprinted out. I jogged after him, shouting, but he was fast, disappearing into the dark. Confusion and adrenaline pumped through me. I stood there, folder clutched in my arms like some lifeline. By the time I remembered Lyle's promise, it was too late. There was no sign of any officer. I backed out of the unit, scanning the street for movement. Silence. Once I got into my car, I shoved the folder under the overhead light. Inside were various documents, typed letters, scribbled notes, property receipts, and even a letter from a lawyer's office. Skimming them, I realized there were references to old HOA disputes, some legal battles Karen had waged on multiple neighbors, and something else. Letters from what looked like a real estate developer, offering Karen a sum of money if she could orchestrate certain code violations in the neighborhood. I felt my heart pound. Was she trying to sabotage property values so that developer could buy out cheap lots? Amid the confusion, one line jumped out at me from a typed email. "Evict large pets to create uniformity. Our clients are discouraged by big dogs on the properties. We'll pay $1,000 per compliance excess." My stomach churned. That explained the weight restriction push. She was getting paid to forcibly remove larger dogs and penalize their owners, presumably to keep the neighborhood looking clean and safe for new investments. In essence, a bribery and extortion scheme. I kept flipping pages until I found an email referencing my address. Next to it was scrawled, "Bernese next. Enough complaints equals forced removal." I sat there stunned. This was bigger than just one dog theft. Karen was making money off targeting certain neighbors, ones with older homes or large pets that didn't fit the perfect family suburb model. I felt a surge of hot anger. She'd kidnapped my shadow for a pay bonus. That was clear now. But where was she hiding him? I snapped pictures of everything on my phone, then called Lyle. No answer. I left him a message, voice trembling with urgency. "Sheriff, I've got damning evidence of Karen's bribery scheme. She's definitely behind the disappearance of other large dogs, too. There are references in these documents. We need to talk, ASAP." I paused, swallowing. I still don't know where Shadow is, but I'll do whatever it takes to find out. I ended the call and leaned back in my seat, the weight of revelation pressing down on me. Suddenly, I wasn't just fighting for my dog. I was going up against a corrupt plan to change the entire neighborhood. Karen had strong motivations and the goal to break laws for personal gain. One thing was certain. I had no intention of letting her get away with it. By the next morning, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating with calls and texts. The pictures I sent, Lyle had circulated among law enforcement. By midday, I was back at the Willow Creek Sheriff's Station, sitting in an interview room with an investigator named Detective Hardwick. He was a stoic man, mid-50s, with a no-nonsense demeanor and sharp eyes. He'd laid out printed copies of the emails and letters from Karen's folder. "This is enough evidence to start an official investigation into fraud, possibly extortion," he said. "You mentioned other large dogs from the area that disappeared. Did you confirm that?" I recalled a handful of times neighbors complained about missing pets, but none had suspected foul play. "Nothing as blatant as this," I said, tapping the folder. "But maybe they were targeted by the same developer scheme." Hardwick nodded gravely. "We'll look into it. Right now, we need to find Ms. Whitlock. If she's still in possession of your dog, that's a separate charge of grand theft. Once we locate her, we'll get him back safely." I tried to stay calm, but the thought of Shadow suffering made my hands tremble. "She has a nephew," I said. "He gave me these documents last night. Maybe you can trace him." Hardwick raised an eyebrow. "We'll try. A relative might be easier to track down. Meanwhile, just stay by your phone, Mr. Grant." He dismissed me, and I spent the next few hours waiting in agony. I walked the perimeter of my yard, remembering Lorraine's laughter echoing against these white picket fences. It was times like these I realized how deeply I relied on Shadow for comfort. Without him, the house felt hollow. I prayed he'd come trotting up the sidewalk any minute, tail wagging, as if it were all a bad dream. That evening, Wendy called and insisted I come over for dinner. "No point sitting alone in that house," she said gently. I thanked her, but decided to wait a bit longer, hoping the sheriff would call with news. At 8 p.m., my phone finally buzzed. It was Lyle. "We got a tip," he said, breathless. A highway patrol officer just spotted a black SUV matching Karen's plates heading toward the state border, near Mapleton Bridge. "We're on our way. I'll keep you posted." My heart hammered. If she made it across state lines, who knew what would happen? I paced my kitchen, phone in hand, adrenaline thrumming through me. After what felt like an eternity, the phone rang again. Lyle's voice came through crackly intense. "We got her, Mr. Grant. She's pulled over at the Mapleton rest stop. She has a large crate in the back. We think it's Shadow." Relief and nervous energy exploded through me. "Is he okay?" I managed. "Seems fine. A bit agitated, but safe. We're bringing them both in. You can meet us at the station." I grabbed my keys without a second thought, nearly tripping over my doormat on the way out. The drive to the station was a blur of streetlights and anxious thoughts. I parked haphazardly and dashed inside. Lyle met me in the lobby. "He's out back," he said, guiding me around the building. "Vet's checking him now." I turned the corner and felt tears burn behind my eyes. Shadow, my big fluff of a dog, sat there panting, tail thumping weakly. He looked exhausted, a bit dirty, but otherwise unharmed. The moment our eyes met, he let out a desperate whine, staggering toward me. I knelt, throwing my arms around his furry neck, burying my face in his thick coat. Everything else melted away in that instant. Lyle gave us a minute, then gently cleared his throat. "Glad you two are reunited. We'll still need you to come inside to provide some final details. Ms. Whitlock is being processed. Looks like we have a pretty airtight case for grand theft." He paused. "Might even tack on additional charges given the evidence of bribery and extortion." I nodded, still hugging Shadow. He sniffed my face, as if making sure it was really me. I muttered over and over, good boy, you're safe now." My chest ached with relief. Inside, I spoke with Detective Hardwick again, who confirmed that Karen had tried to flee. "She claimed she was taking the dog to a no-kill shelter out of state," he said, voice dripping with skepticism. "But the emails you found suggest otherwise. She was basically kidnapping large dogs for profit, clearing the neighborhood for that developer's preference." My anger spiked, but seeing Shadow alive and close again kept me grounded. "I hope this puts an end to her reign on the HOA," I said grimly. Hardwick nodded. "She'll be facing serious charges. Grand theft dog in this state can be a felony when the animal is above a certain value." He glanced at Shadow. "And Bernese Mountain Dogs aren't cheap, you know." That night, I brought Shadow home, ignoring the protests from staff who wanted to keep him for a longer checkup. They relented once the vet confirmed he was fine, just stressed and dehydrated. Shadow bounded out of my truck with surprising energy, sniffing the yard like he was returning from a grand adventure. The moment he hopped onto the porch, a sense of normalcy returned to my world. I set out a fresh bowl of water, and he slurped it up gratefully. Neighbors who heard the news rushed over to welcome him home. Wendy arrived with tears in her eyes, giving Shadow a big, gentle pat on the head. Eileen even brought him a squeaky toy. For the first time in what felt like ages, my house felt alive again. The days that followed turned into a flurry of legal proceedings. Karen was officially removed from the HOA board. The rest of the association tried to save face, claiming ignorance of her scheme. Meanwhile, the local news outlets had a field day. HOA enforcer charged with grand theft and fraud. Cameras were everywhere, capturing my every step when I left the house with Shadow by my side. The silver lining was the unity it brought to Willow Creek. Neighbors who once bickered over trivial rules now banded together, determined to reform the HOA from the inside out. Emily Rodriguez and Alan Porter led the charge for transparency, calling for new elections and fair guidelines about pets. Nobody wanted another Karen Whitlock scenario. At the final hearing a month later, I testified about the day Shadow vanished, the emotional toll, and the evidence of Karen's underhanded deals. The judge looked appalled at her blatant disregard for property rights and the well-being of animals. In the end, Karen was convicted on multiple counts, including grand theft. She would serve time and pay restitution for the dogs she'd taken and for the extortion scheme. A part of me expected her to be defiant until the end, but her facade cracked. Standing there in handcuffs, she appeared small, defeated, and ironically powerless. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt an odd mix of triumph and sadness. I never wanted to see someone lose everything, but she'd brought it on herself by committing genuine crimes. At least now, Shadow could walk our neighborhood without fear. He was, after all, a cherished companion, not a piece of property to be leveraged in a shady real estate plot. Life in Willow Creek took on a softer rhythm after that. The oppressive atmosphere lifted as soon as Karen's watchful eyes were gone. The new HOA leadership eased off petty infractions, focusing instead on real community building. I often found notes in my mailbox now, but they were from neighbors inviting me for coffee or praising Shadow for being the friendliest dog on the block. Sometimes in the early morning, I'd step onto my porch and watch Shadow sprawl out in the sun, yawning. My heart would clench with gratitude. I couldn't help but think of Lorraine, how she'd insisted on getting me this dog, how right she'd been that he'd bring joy into my life. My home might be quiet without her, but it wasn't lonely anymore. A few months later, I heard from Detective Hardwick that several other families located their missing dogs in nearby counties, thanks to lead from Karen's records. They'd been adopted out or placed in far-flung shelters, but eventually they were reunited. I felt a surge of satisfaction knowing that justice had extended beyond just Shadow and me. That night, I sat on my porch with a cold drink in hand, Shadow dozing at my feet. A warm breeze rustled through the hydrangeas. The porch light cast a cozy glow, illuminating the place where his leash used to hang. I picked it up, remembering the panic I felt the day I found it empty. Now, there was no reason to fear. My best friend was home, safe at last. And though that saga had tested me to my core, I emerged stronger, reminded that sometimes a single dog can unite an entire community, and an entire community can stand against even the most stubborn, vindictive HOA Karen. After all, if there's one force more powerful than petty bureaucracy, it's the love we have for our companions, be they human or animal, and the lengths we'll go to protect them. The end.